In early December, artificial intelligence ethics researcher Dr. Timnit Gebru received an email from a VP at Google noting Gebru's resignation from the company while she was on vacation. Gebru had had some difficult interactions with the company after a Google exec asked her to retract or remove her name from a paper that she had submitted to a conference. The paper outlined the risks related to the use of large language models, a form of AI. Google maintains, from what I understand, that you resigned. How do you view your departure?
I'm pretty sure I got fired. You don't resign in the middle of vacation and all of a sudden get cut off from the corporate email chain and everything. You don't have access to your documents. You don't know your calendar. And then your manager doesn't know. And then your manager's manager emails you and tells you they've accepted your resignation effective immediately. I've never heard of such resignations ever. Resignations have a template, you have to say you resign by a certain date. The fact that they're even saying that, and then they continue to say it, more gaslighting.
Why does Google say you resign?
The email I sent them had actually said, here are my conditions if you want me to take my name off of the paper.
So you were prepared to take your name off the paper if Google did certain things?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I said was, the first one is that I'd like to understand what kind of process you followed in order to come to this decision that we have to retract this paper. Who was involved? Why did you send a document to HR? When does HR get involved in discussions about scientific papers? I said I'd like the ethical AI team to have a series of meetings just to have an understanding of what kind of process is going to be followed in the future. And then the third one was, I said, I'd like to understand the parameters of just research that I can do at Google. What kind of censorship can exist? Who is allowed to just censor you? Can just some person who's a VP just come and say no? So those were my three conditions. Every single time I write a document or I try to, ask questions or whatever, there was no engagement with that. It was like, have you taken your name off yet? Please let me know after you've taken your name off, right? I said, I'm happy to consider taking my name off the paper. And I said, the deadline to do this, by the way, is end of January. I told them, so we have time. And then if not, then I said I will work on a last date with my manager that least destabilizes my team.
This was a let's have a dialogue, and if we cannot have a dialogue, then we can talk about me leaving.
Yeah, that's what it was. Because for me, it's like, if you can't even commit to a dialogue, then I don't really know how I can continue to do research in this area.
Google declined to comment for this story. That said, Google head of AI Jeff Dean addressed Gebru's departure in an email to staff on December 3rd, stating that the research paper didn't meet the company's bar for publication because it, quote, ignored too much relevant research. He added, "We accept and respect her decision to resign from Google." Google CEO Sundar Pichai later issued a statement in which he apologized for how Gebru's departure may have caused some Googlers to question their place in the company, and he promised to consider de-escalation strategies in the future. This research paper that you had submitted to a conference, what was it about?
So this paper was about the potential risks and harms of large language models. There's a lot of hype and there is a lot of resources that's going towards developing these large language models, and they can be embedded in many different applications related to language. So whether it's machine translation, completing your sentences or something, trying to predict the next word that you're gonna say, or one of them is even used in search.
Does Google specifically use this technology?
They use one of them, yeah. The funny thing is that we weren't talking about Google specific technologies, right? We were talking about a specific type of technology that is used by literally all companies. We cited so many papers: Facebook, Google, OpenAI, Microsoft. These large language models have generated a lot of hype, a lot of press, but a lot of the dialogue around them is literally dominated by people in privileged groups. Even when people talk about the potential risks and harms, the people you see out there talking about them and being listened to are people from privileged groups. So we wanted to write a paper about what we view as the risks and harms not from that perspective. So after I had been going back and forth on this paper that they asked me to retract, I finally just wanted to get on with my vacation. And so I sent an email to Brain Women and Allies list. So it's an opt-in mailing list to discuss issues that are relevant to women in that mailing list and their allies. I was saying how we keep on writing these documents, asking them to improve diversity, but then they keep on hiring 14% women and then not being accountable for it in any way. So you should stop doing this over and over again and start pushing for leadership accountability. I talked about you need psychological safety. So those were the kinds of things I outlined in my email. And they literally cite that email as the reason for my immediate termination.
Can you tell me exactly what the mission of the AI ethics team was at Google?
So this team is called the Ethical AI team. It's supposed to be, like I said, a research team. I try to emphasize that because we don't want to be a team of like firefighters, right? Where somebody has a fire, somebody has an issue, and we have to deal with it after the fact. I was also hoping to create a safe environment for people in underrepresented groups. These are huge corporations. You don't have so much power to like change everything. But I thought you could course correct a little bit and that I could do something useful there.
What do you think the impact of you getting fired from Google has been on your team and other people who work in AI ethics?
On my team, it's been devastating. This is not just about me. A lot of Black people in tech in general have been talking about this. It's a symbol of what happens to us. I am extremely visible. I have an incredibly supportive team who I'm worried they're going to retaliate against. I have many colleagues who are extremely supportive. That didn't stop them from doing this, not just firing me, but doing it in the most inhumane way, right? Like, it's not just discrimination in the workplace, but it's also, research censorship, AI ethics, and what does that mean? Corporate influence on research, what does that mean? And all of those things are interrelated. So I think that my situation right now is highlighting a confluence of a number of issues.
When you arrived at Google, did you think that your research would have an impact and would maybe change the way that Google was operating? And did that in fact happen?
When I arrived at Google, one thing that really surprised me is that the way I was treated inside Google by the high up people was very different from the way I was treated outside Google by like researchers or even governments or whatever. So I would give a talk at the UN or something, and then the next day they would wonder if I could even be a manager. And I'm like, I don't understand. So that was a constant, cognitive dissonance. I did think that my research could have some sort of impact at Google. There's many other teams that work on AI ethics, but they don't really have the kind of team we have. They don't really have people at underrepresented groups.
Was there ever an instance where you put out some research or you had conversations internally at Google flagging something, and they then responded and made changes and actually made their use of AI technology better?
Many times they wouldn't listen to us internally, and if we put out a paper, it would get traction externally, and then that would come back internally and make a difference. Like I said, levels and who's in power matters a lot at Google, much more than people's expertise. Later though, I think we were able to do some of those things there. So for instance, a number of people in our team wrote a paper about gender recognition and its harms in the trans community. A lot of these automatic gender recognition APIs have a gender binary. It's like male, female. They don't distinguish between sex labels and gender labels, and they assume it's not cultural dependent, that gender is not fluid, that it stays the same.
And that kind of research had an impact within the company.
Yes, kind of research did have an impact within the company. And this is the kind of stuff where people from specific groups, it's very easy for them to just pinpoint the potential harms, right? And people in other groups who have never experienced any issues because of their gender identity would be like, what, So this is one example for me where when you do AI ethics, if you don't center certain groups, points of view, no matter how well-intentioned you are, you're just not going to identify specific risks and harms.
Were there instances where your work didn't actually lead to a change?
When I first got to Google, they had all these like ethics boards and whatever, and nobody from our team was on them. They had this external ethics board that got dismantled, right, because of an outcry. And we didn't even know that this external ethics board was being constructed or anything like that. I was like saying, that it's weird that we're not part of these conversations at all. And so then I was like, I don't know, being tone police, told that I was difficult, that I was making demands.
Do you think that companies like Google are willing to make the kind of big structural changes that your research and the research of other people in your field suggests should be carried out in order to use artificial intelligence technologies ethically?
No.
No.
The answer is no. At the end of the day, I think these big corporations, they're not created for people in marginalized communities. Corporations are not going to change their structures on their own. So that means we have to force them to change the structure. If we're going to protect researchers like this, there needs to be certain oversight and certain measures. The corporations are not going to do it on their own.
A lot has happened since you were fired from Google, right? More than 2,000 Googlers have written a petition protesting your firing. Your own team has written a list of demands asking for you to be reinstated and even promoted. If Google were to offer you a job, would you take it at this point in time?
Right now, I can't imagine because there's no difference from the environment that I left. Maybe if they would made sweeping changes and it was clear, I wasn't gonna be targeted again, and that my team was gonna be safe, maybe.
So what's next for you now?
Spend some time with family, safely, of course. My priorities, I don't want to condone these kinds of environments. I've had enough